He slammed me to the concrete, blood running down my temple, all because I dared to stop a child from lighting a fire, while behind him the camera didn't blink, and the city began to burn. I'm Clarence B. Lewis, a 72-year-old war veteran who witnessed Los Angeles explode in flames and fury, not because we wanted to destroy, but because we were tired of being erased. What they didn't know was that this time we filmed back. And the truth, it survived the fire. He shoved me hard into the shattered glass of a liquor store window and screamed in my face, "Get out of here, old man," like I was the problem, like I was the one who set South Central on fire. His badge glinted under the red glow of burning buildings, but his eyes burned hotter than the flames. And behind him, standing with folded arms and a camcorder swinging from his chest like a noose, was the news anchor from Channel 8, his lips curled eager for the next soundbite. A cheap suit, a rehearsed grimace, and the power to decide which of us would matter in tomorrow's headlines. I am Clarence B. Lewis, 72 years old, a veteran of 2 wars, a retired janitor, a black man who's lived on the corner of 85th and Normandy since 1963. I raised 4 kids on that corner, buried 2 wives, survived Watts, survived Reagan, survived the day they dragged Rodney King across the asphalt and pretended we were too blind to see. I ain't loud. I ain't the type to march and shout no slogans. I just wanted peace. But when my street became a battlefield and my neighbors' faces lit up with TV cameras and riot flames, peace left me behind. That morning started with sirens. It ended with fire. In between was pain. I was sweeping the front step of my corner store Clarence's Cuts and Goods when the verdict hit the airwaves like a punch to the throat. Not guilty. All 4 of them. Not a slap on the wrist. Not a single hour behind bars for the men who beat that boy into a coma and then smirked in court like nothing happened. A white jury, a white judge, and a black neighborhood that had been screaming into a brick wall for 30 years. My grandson Marcus threw the broom out of my hands. "You still want to sweep, Grandpa?" he shouted, pacing like a lion caged too long. They just told us we don't count. Again. At first, I stayed quiet. Like always. Because I thought if I kept my head down, the fire would pass. But fire don't pass. It spreads. By sundown, it was everywhere. Kids I'd known since they were babies were hurling bricks into store windows, and the corner I'd cleaned every day for decades was buried under smoke and broken glass. I tried to stop one boy, Jalen, 12 years old, and scared out his damn mind before he lit a rag and shoved it into a bottle. "This ain't the way," I whispered, grabbing his arm. He jerked away and screamed. "Then tell me the right way. Clarence, tell me." That was the moment I knew the truth. I didn't have an answer. Because everything we'd been taught, patience, peace, prayer, quiet dignity, it hadn't saved Rodney King, hadn't saved Latasha Harlins, hadn't saved the dignity of black folks in this city for generations. It had only made our silence easier to ignore. But I still couldn't throw a brick, couldn't set a fire. So I did the only thing I knew. I stood between the liquor store and the mob hands, up shouting their names like a prayer Rodney. Latasha. My brother Harold, who got beat by cops outside a jazz club in '72. My daughter Patrice, who bled out in a South Central alley and never got justice. I shouted their names and begged the kids to stop. That's when the officer came. He was young, pale like cold milk, shaking hands, helmet crooked. He thought I was the one tossing bottles, thought the old black man yelling in the middle of smoke and rage must be the threat. He tackled me, slammed my ribs into the concrete, told me to shut up and comply. When I told him I was trying to stop the violence, not cause it, he pulled me up by my collar and hissed, "You people don't get to play hero now. You lit this match." I looked into his face and saw a child. A scared child hiding behind a badge, desperate to blame anyone for the chaos he couldn't control. But I also saw something else, something colder. The comfort of knowing the system would protect him no matter what he did. The smirk that said, "Go ahead, scream. Nobody's listening." But someone was listening. The girl from the laundromat. Maria, 17. Smart. Always watching. She was filming with a clunky camcorder her cousin loaned her. I didn't know it then, but that footage me pinned on the pavement, blood dripping down my temple while I whispered, "I'm just trying to help," would go viral within hours. Not because of me, but because the cop hit me one more time before letting me go. That punch made the evening news. The headlines didn't care about the years I spent scrubbing floors to send my kids to school, or the fact I'd served in Vietnam. All they saw was a senior agitator caught in police confrontation. They played it like I was part of the riot, like I was fuel on the fire. But my neighbors knew better. Mrs. Green from across the street brought me ice for my ribs. Old man Jerome, who hadn't left his stoop in a year, helped me pick up broken shelves from my looted shop. Marcus, who'd stormed off that morning, cursing the whole damn world, came back with tears in his eyes and sat beside me on the curb like a boy again. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "You don't deserve this." I looked out over Florence and Normandy and saw my city crumbling in real time. Buildings I'd passed every day were now blackened skeletons. Sirens howled like wolves. Helicopters circled overhead like buzzards waiting for us to finish dying. And somewhere beneath it all, in the cracks of burning pavement, I saw something growing. Not rage, not vengeance, something quieter, stronger, resolve. Because that night, while the city burned, I wrote. My hands were shaking, my body was bruised, but I wrote. Every face I saw, every lie they told, every truth the cameras ignored. I wrote it down, and I called it The Other Side of Fire. A witness account, not to shame my people, but to remind the world that behind every riot there's a reason, and behind every reason a name. The world was watching, but not listening, not yet. I was just an old janitor with a pen and a busted rib cage. But I'd seen too much to stay silent. And, as I stared at the orange glow painting the sky above my block, I made a promise to myself, to Marcus, to Maria, to every name I'd ever shouted. This time they will hear us, even if it takes burning down every lie they've ever built. They say the worst part of a riot is the noise, but that's a lie. The worst part is the silence that follows, the kind that creeps in after the fires die, when sirens fade into the distance and you're left alone with the smell of soot and 100 questions no one wants to answer. That next morning I stepped outside with my ribs taped and knees aching, and South Central was a graveyard. Not of bodies, no, not yet, but of dignity. The streets were still warm, windows gone, walls tagged with names of anger, and somewhere in the silence a whisper clung to the air. This is what they wanted. I limped to my shop, or what used to be my shop. Clarence's Cuts and Goods was nothing more than a hollow frame. The sign had melted. The barber chairs I'd polished for 40 years were smoldering heaps of twisted chrome. My grandkids had learned to braid hair on those chairs. My daughter used to sing to me while I cut her bangs crooked. Now it was gone, like it never mattered. I just stood there, staring at the ashes, until Maria's voice broke through behind me. They said it was gangbangers, she whispered, camera in hand. Said you were in there throwing bottles. I turned. Is that what they're saying now? They're showing clips on the news. Just clips. No context. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes didn't blink. That girl had seen more truth through her viewfinder than the whole city council combined. She played the footage for me, grainy, shaky, but clear enough. Me yelling, the cop hitting. Blood. My face. And then the part no one aired, me holding Jalen back. Me begging kids to stop. Me being pushed from both sides. I'm uploading the full video, she said. Not edited. Raw. Let them see. I put my hand on her shoulder. Be ready. They'll try to twist it. They already are, she said. But smoke don't lie, Mr. Clarence. It always tells where the fire came from. That afternoon, Marcus came home with something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just anger, but direction. He had flyers, pamphlets, meeting schedules. He sat across from me like a man on a mission. Community meeting. Tonight. Old Church on 47th. They're asking you to speak. I laughed, then winced. Cracked ribs make laughter expensive. Me, I ain't no preacher. You're more than that, he said. You're the only one they all listen to. Truth is, I didn't want to go. What was I gonna say? That the fire was righteous, that the police were wrong, that we should burn it all down again, or that we should kneel and pray and wait another 30 years for justice to knock politely. But I went. The pews were packed. Black, brown, tired, desperate. Kids in hoodies, mothers in bonnets, barbers, teachers ex-cons, old folks with canes and folded flags. No cops, no press, just us, just pain. And Maria's camera in the back corner. They handed me a mic. I stood up, hands trembling, took a breath. And for the first time since the world cracked open, I didn't feel like a janitor. I felt like a witness. My name is Clarence B. Lewis, I said. I swept the floors of this city longer than most of y'all been alive, and I've seen what gets thrown out. No one interrupted. No one coughed. It was like the whole room held its breath. I saw Watts burn in 65. They called us thugs then, too. I saw what they did to Rodney King. And I saw what they did to me last night on the pavement in front of a store I built with my own hands. They didn't see a man. They saw a matchstick. I looked around, at the eyes shining with unshed tears. They're gonna try to make you forget. Gonna replay the footage until it loses meaning. But don't forget. Not this time. Because the fire ain't just anger, it's memory. And memory is power. I stepped back, thought I was done. But then Marcus stood up. He took the mic from me. My grandfather taught me how to fix a hinge, how to shake a man's hand, and how to tell the truth even when nobody's listening. I used to think he was quiet because he didn't care. Now I know he was watching, learning, waiting. He turned to the crowd. We don't have to wait anymore. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in something deeper. Resolution. They passed around sheets, organized patrols to protect local businesses, set up food stations, legal aid clinics, a hotline to record police misconduct. They weren't rioting anymore. They were rebuilding, but not just walls. Rebuilding the story. From the inside. That night, I walked home with Marcus and Maria under the dull glow of flickering street lamps. The National Guard had arrived jeeps rolling down Crenshaw like we were occupied territory. Soldiers with rifles standing guard at supermarkets as if groceries had become dangerous. I used to mop those aisles, I muttered, pointing to a store surrounded by barbed wire. Now they aim guns at it. Maria asked, "Do you think it'll change anything?" I stopped, looked at the soot on my hands, the bruises on my face, the hope in her voice. "No," I said, "but I think we can." Later at home, I watched the news with the sound off. The footage played again, me tackled. Again. And again. But now, underneath it, a banner read, "Viral Video Sparks Civil Rights Uprising in L.A." And beside it a still frame of me holding Jalen back, not as a rioter, but as a protector. Maybe they finally saw the smoke for what it was. Maybe. Or maybe the fire was only beginning. The third night after the verdict, the helicopters no longer sounded like machines. They sounded like judgment, buzzing above our homes like they were searching for a reason to erase us. Curfews were in place. The city was sectioned off like a war zone. I'd been to war. Twice. And I can tell you this felt worse. In war, you knew where the front line was. Here it was, every sidewalk, every store, every time you reached into your pocket too fast. South Central had become a cage, and no one knew who had the key. Marcus hadn't slept. Not since that first night. He'd been out organizing community patrols, checking on elders, guarding burned-out homes from looters. He came home with smoke on his clothes and purpose in his step. But I saw what was building behind his eyes' rage, the kind that doesn't burn bright but low and steady, the kind that turns a man into a weapon without him even knowing it. That night he came into the kitchen, sat across from me, and said, "They arrested Maria." I dropped my fork. Why? She was filming again. Outside the liquor store on 84th. A cop told her to put the camera down. She said no. They cuffed her and called it obstruction. My hands clenched. My knuckles ached. Where is she now? Central lockup. But I got it on tape. Everything. The officer's badge. His name. Her screams. He pushed a tape across the table. VHS. Labeled in thick marker Maria. April 30th. The date was wrong, but the pain was real. I stared at the tape. I wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a politician. I didn't have a platform or a following. But I had something else. The truth. The raw kind. The kind they couldn't edit or bury. And I had one tool left, my voice. The next morning, I walked into City Hall with nothing but a cane and that tape in my pocket. They didn't want to let me in. But someone recognized me from the viral video from the community meetings. An intern, maybe 19, whispered to the security guard, and suddenly the doors opened like they remembered I still mattered. I demanded a meeting with Councilman Hargrove, the one who hadn't said a word since the riots began. They said he was in session. I told them I'd wait, and I did, for 6 hours, until, finally, the doors opened and he came out. Tall, white, hair so perfect it looked sprayed on. He saw me and smiled like I was a constituent instead of a casualty. "Mr. Lewis, I've heard a lot about you. Then you know why I'm here." He gestured to a side room. "Let's talk." Inside, I didn't sit. I just pulled out the tape and set it on the table between us. "That girl," I said. 17. No weapon. No threat. Just a camera. And they threw her into a cage. He picked up the tape, turned it over in his hands like it was a foreign object. "You know," he said, slowly, "we're trying to maintain order." I slammed my cane on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Order," I spat. "Is that what you call this? You let the streets rot for decades. You underfunded our schools, over-policed our blocks, ignored every damn cry for help. And now, when the fire finally comes, you act like it's a surprise. He didn't move. They fear us more than they understand us, I said. And that fear is killing our kids. He opened his mouth, but I wasn't done. I buried a daughter who called 911 and never got an ambulance. I watched my brother bleed under a white nightstick. And now you're locking up a teenage girl for having the courage to film the truth you won't face. I leaned in, eyes steady. That tape goes public tonight. Unless you fix this. To my shock, he nodded, just once. I'll make a call. He did. And Maria walked free an hour later. She came out of the precinct shaking, eyes red, but her camera bag still slung over her shoulder like a badge of honor. I hugged her, not like a friend, like a comrade. We'd both seen the war inside the walls now, and we weren't unarmed anymore. That night, she uploaded the tape. No edits, no filters. Just raw truth. And it spread like wildfire. Not just in South Central, not just in LA, but across the country, on college campuses, in newsrooms, in living rooms where people could no longer pretend they didn't see. They saw Maria. They saw me. They saw themselves. And something changed. Not everything, not enough, but something. The mayor called an emergency press conference, announced a new community advisory board, promised reforms. But we'd heard that before. What mattered more was what happened in the streets. Young people started showing up at our meetings, not with Molotovs, with notebooks, questions, cameras. They didn't want to riot. They wanted to rebuild. One night, Marcus said to me, "I think I'm going to run." For what I asked, neighborhood council. I smiled. About damn time. Because maybe the fire wasn't just destruction. Maybe it was cleansing, burning down the rot so something better could grow. And maybe, just maybe this time, the story wouldn't be written by those looking down, but by those who rose from the smoke. I used to believe that change came from pulpits or podiums, from men in suits behind long desks and polished microphones. But the older I get, the more I realize it comes from those with cameras. Not the ones on TV, but the ones in our hands. Maria proved that. A 17-year-old with a camcorder had done more to shake the system than 100 polished speeches ever could. Her footage didn't lie. Her lens didn't flinch. And neither did she, even after they tried to cage her for telling the truth. The morning after her release, the sidewalk in front of my burned-out barber shop looked different. Not because it had healed, but because it had become a meeting ground. Kids sat in circles on the curb with notepads and borrowed cameras listening to elders like me, not as relics, but as witnesses. We shared stories not because we were nostalgic, but because they were looking for blueprints. I told them about 1965, about Watts, about how the smoke always rises first and the lies always follow right behind. Maria took the mic that afternoon. It wasn't planned. But when someone asked, "What do we do next?" she stood up like she'd been waiting her whole life for the question. "You keep filming," she said. "You keep asking. You stop believing them when they say it's just a few bad apples because the orchard is toxic. You document everything, your pain, your pride, your progress, and then you share it, loudly, so they can't pretend they didn't hear." Someone asked her, "What if they come for us again?" She looked around the circle. Her voice didn't shake. "Then we show the world what came for us." That was the beginning of the archive. It started with one dusty laptop in the back of the old church on 47th. We collected footage, not just of police brutality, but of joy, resilience, Mrs. Green handing out soup, Jerome teaching kids how to patch a tire, Marcus giving speeches in front of grocery stores. Every moment mattered, because if all we showed was pain, they'd forget we were human. But if we showed life real life, they couldn't ignore us anymore. Within weeks, people were sending tapes from other cities: Oakland, Detroit, Chicago. It wasn't just LA burning, it was a country cracking open. One day, I watched a clip from New York. A young black boy, maybe 12, holding a sign that read, "I am not your threat." He was trembling, but he didn't run. A line of officers towered in front of him, but he stood anyway. Just stood. I cried that night, not because of fear, because of courage, because in that boy I saw my brother, my daughter, myself. But not everyone wanted to see. One afternoon, a patrol car rolled up outside the church. 2 white officers stepped out, their boots too clean for our streets. One of them, young, thick-neck shaved head, called out to Maria while she was filming a volunteer food drive. "Hey, little girl, you got a permit for that." She didn't even look up. "Do I need one to film a sandwich?" The officer didn't laugh. "You're obstructing an investigation." "There's no investigation," she said calmly. "Just community. And I'm recording for safety. Yours and ours." They stared at her. One hand hovered near a holster. I stepped between them. "You know who I am," I said. "I'm the old man you tackled on camera. That footage went global. Don't think we're not still recording." His hand twitched. But then he saw it, 4 cameras all pointed back. Quiet. Steady. He got back in the car. They left. We stayed. Because this time we weren't alone. That night, Marcus came home with an envelope. Inside were grainy photos, surveillance style, of me, of Maria, of the church. "They're watching us," he said. "Let them," I replied. "Let them see what truth looks like." But Maria didn't sleep that night. I heard her pacing in the guest room. I heard her crying, muffled through the walls. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I'd be lying. Because the war wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside the walls of our homes, of our hearts, of our stories. And the only weapon we had left was the truth. The next day, Maria gave me a USB drive. "This has everything she said. All the footage, all the statements, everything we've built. I want you to have it. In case something happens to me." I took it with shaking hands. "Don't talk like that." "I have to," she said. "Because they're not scared of me filming. They're scared of what happens when everyone sees it." I looked her in the eye. They should be. And in that moment, I knew we weren't just documenting a movement. We were becoming one, not through marches or Molotovs, but through memory. Because the ones with the cameras were rewriting history, frame by frame. It started like any other Sunday, slow, quiet, heavy. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort but warns. I felt it in my bones the moment I stepped outside. The birds weren't singing. The breeze didn't move. And the usual hum of neighbors waking up to coffee and gospel music had been replaced by an eerie stillness. Like the block knew something we didn't. Marcus was already gone off to a youth outreach near Crenshaw. Maria had stayed up all night editing a new clip, piecing together footage from the protests, the police standoffs, and the town hall where I'd spoken 3 days ago. She called it Through Our Eyes. I'd watched it twice before the sun came up. Both times I cried, not just because of the faces on screen, but because of what I heard in their voices' truth. Not anger for anger's sake, but clarity. Controlled, righteous, unshakable. By mid-morning, the city buzzed again, not with life, but with the sound of tires screeching and radios squawking. Maria came running into the kitchen, barefoot, her laptop clutched tight against her chest. "They deleted it," she gasped. "Deleted what?" The video. All of it. YouTube flagged it for inciting unrest. Instagram banned my page. The archive account's been locked. Overnight. No warning. Everything we posted, it's gone. I didn't say a word. Because I couldn't. Because I'd seen this before. In Vietnam, they taught us how to clear a village without firing a bullet burn their rice poison their wells and make them believe the fight was hopeless. And in South Central, they just did the same thing digitally. I sat down slowly, the air thick around me. They're not deleting videos, I said. They're deleting memory. Maria's hands were shaking, but her eyes were fierce. I have backups. I stored everything on external drives. But if they're coming for our platforms, it means they're scared. No, I corrected her. It means they're preparing. The next blow came by noon. The city announced a temporary emergency ordinance banning unauthorized gatherings and unregistered independent media within areas of active investigation. Translation: don't gather, don't film, don't speak. Maria looked at me. They're trying to shut us down before the protest tonight. The protest, organized by Marcus and the Youth Coalition, was meant to be peaceful. A candlelight vigil for those lost during the riots. It had permits. It had press approval. It had city clearance. Now it had none. I picked up my coat. Maria grabbed her camera, and we walked into a city trying to forget us. When we arrived at the church where the march would begin, the streets were already lined with cruisers. Dozens. Cops in riot gear stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces blank behind black visors. No batons out yet, but they would be. Marcus was standing on the church steps, holding a megaphone and a folder of permits that meant nothing now. When he saw me, his face twisted not in fear, but fury. They're saying it's illegal now, that we can't gather. That, if we don't disperse, they'll arrest us all. I looked past him. Hundreds had come. Kids, parents, elders, students, holding candles, signs, cameras. No bricks, no fire, just light. And then the speakers crackled. A voice boomed from a police intercom. This is an unauthorized gathering. You are ordered to disperse immediately or face arrest. No one moved. I walked forward, past Maria, past Marcus, past the line of trembling kids with signs reading, "Don't shoot," and "Who protects us?" And I stood in the street alone. I raised my hands. "I'm Clarence B. Lewis," I shouted. "I'm 72. I've paid taxes in this city longer than some of you have been alive. I served this country. I've bled for it. I've buried my children in its soil." I looked every officer in the eye. "And I am not leaving." They stepped forward, but before they could reach me, a chorus rose, not of screams, but of cameras clicking. Maria, Marcus, dozens of kids, journalists, onlookers, every lens locked on us. Then something happened that I'll never forget. One officer, tall Latino, maybe 30, lowered his shield, then his baton, then he stepped back, and others followed. Not all, but enough. The crowd held. We didn't march that night. We stood, still, silent, glowing with candlelight. Maria's footage from that night would become her most watched video, millions of views in hours, despite takedown after takedown. Copies of it flooded Reddit, Telegram, Twitter. The truth doesn't die when it's seen by enough people. It spreads like wildfire. Later that night, as we sat on the church steps, Maria turned to me. "They wanted to erase us. They always have," I said. "But this time we kept the pen, because when they came to silence us, we chose to be louder, not with violence, but with memory, with lenses, with light. They never thought we'd get this far. That's what I kept telling myself the morning we walked into the courthouse. The halls smelled too clean like bleach and lies. Marble floors, bulletproof glass, flags everywhere waving for a justice that never seemed to see us. But on that day, after months of community meetings footage, unrest, truth-telling South Central walked in too. And they didn't come empty-handed. Maria wore her usual jeans, sneakers, and the oversized denim jacket she refused to wash because it held the stories in. Her camera was slung across her chest not to film that day, but as a symbol. Marcus wore a suit, borrowed, wrinkled. But when he adjusted the tie in the hallway mirror, I saw the fire in his eyes. He wasn't just a young man anymore. He was history stepping forward. I was the first to testify. The case was technically about Maria's arrest months earlier. Obstruction of police investigation. But we all knew this wasn't about one incident. It was about all of it. Rodney King, Latasha Harlan's me on the concrete, Marcus being silenced, the archive being erased. This was about the truth on trial. The judge was white, middle-aged, reading glasses. I couldn't tell if he was tired or simply indifferent. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. "Clarence Benjamin Lewis." I answered, voice steady. "And your relation to the defendant?" "I'm a witness," I said, "to everything this city has tried to bury." The prosecutor objected. The judge let it go. They asked what I saw that night. The night Maria was arrested. I told them. "I saw a girl filming truth," I said. "And I saw men with badges treat that truth like a threat." The prosecutor asked, "Were the officers under duress?" "Not from her," I replied. She was 17, 5 feet tall, holding a camera, not a weapon. The only thing they were afraid of was being seen. Then they brought in Maria's footage. The judge tried to stop it, said it was prejudicial. But Marcus stood up from the audience holding a document high. We filed an emergency public interest petition, signed by over 50,000 citizens. This is Exhibit C. The room froze. The judge blinked, then allowed it. They played the footage on a mounted screen. It showed Maria being pushed, cuffed, shoved against a wall, screaming, "I have the right to record." It showed the officer who struck me months before stepping into frame sneering. It showed Maria's camera crashing to the ground and still filming from the floor. Every second was a wound, every second truth. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. Then they called the arresting officer to the stand. He was nervous. He stumbled through his answers, said Maria was hostile. The footage didn't lie. When he claimed she posed a threat, Marcus rose again. "Your Honor," he said, "if a teenage girl with a camera is a threat, then this entire courtroom is guilty." I saw the jury shift in their seats. Later, they called me back this time, not for what I saw, but who I was. "Mr. Lewis, the defense attorney, said you've been called the conscience of South Central. What do you want this court to understand?" I stood, hands on my cane, looking out over the faces, tired, tense, waiting. I want them to understand that we're not asking for revenge. We're asking for recognition. We're asking for the right to be seen, heard, and remembered. We're asking that our children not be born with targets on their backs, that our elders not die with cuffs on their wrists, that the truth we carry in our cameras, our voices, our skin, be treated like it matters. I paused and said the words I'd written months ago, words I never thought I'd say in court. You can erase a video. You can burn a building. But you cannot delete what the fire has already exposed. The jury didn't look away. They couldn't. By the end of the day, the prosecutor was unraveling. Their arguments fell apart like rotted wood. Their story of Maria as a troublemaker of me as an agitator of our community, as a threat no longer held, because we had told our story louder, clearer, together. 3 days later, the verdict came. Maria not guilty, but it didn't end there. The judge, perhaps moved or embarrassed, or both, issued a statement from the bench calling for a re-examination of police conduct, media rights, and community transparency. Empty words, maybe. But they were public, on record, and we would hold them to it. That night South Central didn't burn. It danced. They lit candles, not in mourning, but in defiance. Kids chalked messages on sidewalks. We are not threats. We are witnesses. We are the archive. And Marcus, still in his wrinkled suit, stood on a crate outside the courthouse and said, "This was never about one girl. It was about all of us. And now they've seen us. And they can't unsee." I stood beside Maria. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Do you think we really changed anything?" I looked out over the crowd, over the candles, over the signs, over the cameras still rolling, and I said, "Not everything. Not yet. But we've cracked the wall. And now the light's getting in. The thing about riots, they come and go. But the stories never leave. They smolder beneath the surface like coals waiting for a breath of air. And on the morning of the 1-year anniversary, the air shifted again. South Central looked different. Not healed, no. Wounds like ours don't scar that easy. But it was alive. Where there had been ash murals bloomed. Where the archive had once been wiped clean, it now stood as a physical building, painted the color of memory, rust, gold, deep indigo. Kids came there after school to learn editing, to film elders, to document joy. Maria ran it like a general sleep-deprived fearless, never without that same old camera hanging from her neck. And Marcus. He won the neighborhood council seat by a landslide. First thing he did was introduce a Community Media Rights Act, named it after Latasha Harlins. Second thing he did was help pass the South Central Public Record Law protecting all civilians' right to film law enforcement without interference. I thought about everything we lost. The shop, my friends, years of quiet survival. But we had gained something louder. That morning, I stood at the corner of Florence and Normandy again, the very place where it all began. The sun was low, casting long shadows. There was no smoke this time, just candles, flowers, posters, and people. They'd organized a community vigil. No permits needed now. The law had changed. Because we changed it. Kids read poems on milk crates. Mothers wept in each other's arms. Journalists, not just local, but national, stood on the sidelines with their cameras rolling but not speaking. They'd learned at least a little to let us tell our own story. Then Maria stepped up. She didn't speak from paper. She never did. I used to think justice was a courtroom, she said. That if we shouted loud enough, someone would finally listen. But I learned justice is community. Justice is cameras that don't blink. Justice is elders who stand in the street when everyone else runs. Justice is memory. She turned to me, to Mr. Clarence Lewis, who taught me that history lives in sidewalks, in sweat, in silence, and in the decision to speak when silence is no longer safety. I wanted to speak too, so I did. I walked to the front. The cane wasn't just support, it was a symbol now. A baton passed from every man who'd stood on broken streets and dared to believe he still had something to offer. I took the mic. "My name is Clarence B. Lewis," I said. And I was supposed to be invisible, a ripple through the crowd. But I didn't vanish. because I had a granddaughter in spirit who filmed the truth, because I had a grandson who refused to stay quiet, because I lived long enough to see a city listen, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. I held up a USB drive, the same one Maria gave me a year ago, the one I'd kept in my coat every day since. This, I said, is a record of fire. Not to glorify it, but to understand it. This is what they tried to erase. This is proof that even in America's darkest days, we saw light. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I handed it to a white boy in the front row. He looked maybe 13, pale, freckles, holding a camera borrowed from the archive. He stared at the drive in awe. "Tell the truth," I said, "and never look away." That evening, as the sun set behind South Central, the lights of the archive flickered on. A projection began on the building's wall, a loop of moments captured during the riots and after. Not the violence, the resistance, the rebuilding, the joy. Me holding Jalen back, Maria being pulled into a hug after her trial, Marcus' fist raised not in anger but in pride. The community side by side, candles in hand. We watched in silence, and I knew we didn't end the war, but we started a revolution, not with fire and glass, with vision, with memory, with truth. Later that night, a little girl tugged on my sleeve. She had braids like my Patrice once wore. "Are you the man from the video?" she asked. "I'm a man from it," I said. "But it's your video now." She smiled, and in that smile I saw the future not perfect, but possible. So many tried to silence us, erase us, burn us down. But what they didn't know, what they never understand, is that fire doesn't just destroy. It also clears the path, and we kept the fire. Not to burn, but to build. The riots ended, but the story didn't. Because this time we didn't let the smoke bury the truth. We recorded, we remembered, we rebuilt, and we proved that even in America's darkest hours when justice seemed like a myth, and the world turned its back, ordinary people armed with nothing but courage and cameras could hold the powerful accountable and change the course of history. The meaning of life isn't found in silence or safety, but in standing up when it's hardest, in passing the truth to the next generation, and in refusing to be unseen. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one voice matters, subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment with the name of someone whose story needs to be remembered. Share this with someone who thinks one person can't make a difference. Because together we are the archive, and we are just getting started.